Hi, everybody. Before we commence with tonight's fantastic Making Diversity and Inclusion Real Stories from the Workplace event, I would like to firstly acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting. I am on the land of the Gadigal of the Eora Nation, but given that tonight's event is virtual, you could be dialing in from anywhere across the country. And I would just like to ask that you take a moment to reflect on the land on which we're all on. Alpha Australia acknowledges Australia's First Nations peoples as the traditional owners and the custodians of the land, and we pay our respect to the elders past, present and emerging, and through them all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, including those who may be tuning in tonight. My name is John Carlo. I'm Alpha Australia's Community Partnerships Director by night, and during the day I'm a Senior Policy Officer for People with Disability Australia and Secretary of the Australian LGBT Multicultural Council. The two national peak bodies that represent all people with disability and the LGBTIQA multicultural, multi-faith communities in Australia. Before we kick off, I just wanted to clarify some key terms that will be used during tonight's events. The first term is diversity. At Alpha Australia, we use diversity broadly, and I will use an example to demonstrate what we mean. When we talk about diversity in the workplace, we're talking about people and a range of characteristics like race, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, age, physical abilities, and religious beliefs. A second term that we would like to define is inclusion, which is an act of including someone as part of a group. Notice that the key word here is act. Inclusion is an action, and to quote Mark McMillan, who's an Aboriginal human rights lawyer, diversity is a fact and inclusion is an act. Lastly, the last term that needs clarifying is OFA itself. For those who don't know, OFA is an abbreviation for Out for Australia. For those who don't know, Out for Australia is an LGBTQIA+ organisation with the mission of helping young QIA+ professionals be their authentic selves in the workplace. A key way we do that is through our free mentoring program, Mentor Loop. And Mentor Loop is an entirely free program that we provide online, and it's very easy to sign up. So if you're looking for advice in regards to your career, then please consider getting yourself a mentor. Information on our website. So for those who haven't joined us before, tonight's event is an online interactive panel where we'll be joining. I'll be joined with some amazing panelists from across some of our partners, which I'll introduce shortly. There'll also be an opportunity for you to ask some questions at the end of tonight's events. The way, if you'd like to ask some questions, is to submit your questions is to do so by the chat box in Zoom or leaving us a comment on the Facebook live stream. So if you'd like to do that, please do so. As I said, it's an interactive event, and we would love for you to ask questions because ultimately these questions are best asked from this amazing panelists you've got in front of us. So to kick us off, I think it's probably best that we probably go around and introduce ourselves. So why don't we go around and we'll have everyone introduce their name, the pronouns, and the organisation they're from, as well as the field of work that they're in. So I might start with Amit, if that's all right.
First cab off the rank. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Amit Bose. I go with the pronouns he, him. I work for a company called Accenture. I've been with Accenture now for 13 years. It'll be 13 years next month. I moved from Sydney to Melbourne with my husband, who I've been with for 14 years now. So I've known him for a year, and I told him that we have to move to Melbourne because I got a job with Accenture, and he took a massive leap of faith and moved with me to Melbourne, and we've been living here for the last 13 years, and yeah, that's a little bit of me. And I'm very excited to be part of the panel.
We're very excited to have you as well, Amit. Who wants to go next?
I'm happy to go next. Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Tchaikovsky, and I'm currently an Associate Director with Pride Inclusion Programs. I have a close affinity with Out for Australia since its inception back in 2013. And I am from a corporate background, so I used to work at Boston Consulting Group and LEK Consulting. And I've been doing sort of LGBTQ+ community activism and advocacy for probably the past 18 years and almost 10 years on the marriage equality campaign. That's me.
Okay.
Matthew.
Hello, good evening, everyone. So my name is Matt Chuck, pronouns he, him. So I work for JP Morgan, so that's a US investment bank. Started off in the UK, did a couple of years with JP Morgan there. and then relocated out to Sydney 5 years ago. So very excited to just getting my citizenship very soon. So we'll be fully fledged Australian soon. But day job is compliance, and then for the enjoyment and just personal satisfaction, the co-chair for our Pride Business Resource Group here within ANZ.
Fantastic. Congratulations on the citizenship, Matthew.
Thank you.
And last but not least, Riley.
Hi, so my name's Riley Edwards. My pronouns are they and them, and I'm the Diversity and Inclusion Advisor at RMIT University, and I focus primarily on the student work that we do at the university. And outside of that, I'm also run an LGBTQ rock climbing club called Climbing Cuties.
Oh, we need one of those. That's fantastic. Thank you so much. And I'm glad we ended up on you with you, Riley, because I thought we'd kick off this conversation with a bit of an understanding of the difference between diversity and inclusion. I know I defined those terms a bit in my introduction, but I think this space is very much a space that is all about practice. And so it'd be really nice to hear from each one of you what you think the difference between diversity and inclusion. So maybe I'll start with you this time, Riley, considering
Sure.
that.
Yeah, so I guess I think you touched on this before. Diversity is really who we are, and then inclusion is really about who we invite along. So when I'm speaking to people about the importance of D&I work, I often hear people say, oh, that our space is welcome, we're very welcoming, and we don't really care who's here or who comes and goes. But my response to them is that you should care, and that you should care that the space that you're holding does reflect the diversity of your community. And so I guess that's the difference between having a welcome sign on the doors and saying, you're welcome to come into the space, and then having someone at the door greeting them and inviting them in and making sure that they're feeling welcome and feeling okay and feeling like they can participate in the space. So yeah, I guess, many LGBTQ people will probably see that little rainbow sign at the cafe and be like, I'm safe here, I can go there. So we just want to make sure that with the work that we're doing, we're putting up those little signals around. So yeah, I guess inclusion, diversity is who we are, and then inclusion is taking those active steps to make sure that our space is representative of our diversity.
I think it's a really good segue to Elaine, considering what you do, Elaine.
Oh, I didn't expect that so soon. Sorry, just another little story that we sometimes use to paint the picture of diversity versus inclusion is, if you're out with your friends, you're on the dance floor, you're having a great time, you're all dancing, you all are accepting and inclusive in your heads. The person who's standing on their own at the edge of the dance floor doesn't know that. And they will never or very rarely come up to you and say, can I join in, for fear of rejection. So as a group of people who all feel safe and secure, you have to go and invite that person to join you on the dance floor and join your group. So that's sort of a little sort of story we use to sort of paint a picture of what actually inclusion is. No one can read what's in your head. You have to act and do something positive to bring them into the circle. But that brings me to workplace inclusion. What is it and why does it matter? One of the first things I would like to highlight is after the success of the marriage equality campaign, there was lots of muttering and people saying, oh, there's going to be fatigue around LGBTQ+ issues, especially within corporates and organizations who'd been heavily involved in the campaign for quite a long time. And we did worry that, everyone would think, say, you've all got marriage equality, that's what you wanted, you're done. And we all know that was only the beginning of a lot more work that there was to do. What we found at Pride and Diversity was actually there was a surge in new members coming on board and who were very keen to start up D&I programs, and in particular, their LGBTQ+ inclusion pillar. I've just got to get to my notes and scroll. One of the, to me, what I think is one of the key drivers behind this surge and upswell was that many employers who had spoken out in support of marriage equality knew that their LGBTQ employees were, of course, supported, but I don't think they realised the sheer number and thousands of allies who stood up in support of their colleagues. which showed a lot of the employers and a lot of the leaders that the stance they had taken for marriage equality was the right thing to do. On the flip side, there were some organizations who said, sorry, we approached them and talked to them and said, we can't take a stand for marriage equality. We cannot do that as a business. We've got a board to answer to, stakeholders. But again, due to the upswell of support and advocacy from their employees, they did a flip. And there was quite a few organizations who did come and say, we were wrong. And we realized for the majority of our employees, we have to take a stand on this. So, never underestimate your voice and the impact it can have. And what we've also seen at Pride Diversity is the level of engagement. So not just members coming on board and saying, it's great to be a member of PID, tick, we can put on our website. It's actually the level of engagement has increased, and it's gone from what was a lot of training that we used to do in LGBTQ plus awareness, allies, and gender affirmations, but it's now actually gone into more strategic planning, so much more long-term consulting, roundtables, and what we have seen a growth in as well are the intergroups. So a lot of LGBTQ networks in businesses join with other industry networks to form Interbank, Interbuild, Interinsure, Intertech, Interpharma, Interfirm, higher education are getting together, and also Media Pride. So the growth in these intergroups as well has shown that within organizations and businesses, not only is their network strong, but they're collaborating with with what would normally be competitors, and networks are getting together to share best practice, to share ideas, to support each other and things. So there's been a huge growth in this as well. Some other good news for organizations that are doing work in the LGBTQ plus inclusion space is that, oh, sorry, I should have explained. We do a workplace equality survey, an employee survey. And this year we got 32,000 responses, which was up from, I think, 27,000 last year, which is a huge data set to work from. And it's anonymous, so and it goes out to employees can send it out, and anyone can fill this employee survey in. You don't have to be a member of Pride and Diversity. So out of 26,000 responses to this particular question, sorry, I've lost my train of thought now. For organizations who are doing work in the LGBTQ inclusion space, over 60% of 26,000 responses said that a positive track record would influence them in making them join that organization. Now that is a huge driver for the business case. It's a key differentiator when you're competing for top talent, and you want that competitive advantage. And out of the 26,000 responses, 5,500 identify as LGBTQ plus. So there's a lot of, there's thousands in there, 21,000 that are not identifying. So it shows the power that the LGBT inclusion space doesn't just benefit LGBTQ plus people, it benefits allies as well. Over 80% responded that employees who are active in the LGBTQ plus workplace inclusion has a positive impact on workplace culture. So, it's not just us. And that was the thing through marriage equality when we didn't have the allies and we didn't have businesses on board. Everyone on the no side would say, well, of course you want marriage equality. Of course you people, us want this. But it just shows from the amount of allies who supported, the amount of businesses who supported it, it's a good thing for everybody. When it comes to performance and productivity in the workplace, if you are relaxed, happy, and you can be yourself, you're much more likely to focus on work and perform well. 12.5% of the 5,500 responses who identify as LGBTQ plus said they're not out at all in the workplace. 30% said they have to spend time editing conversations and hiding who they are. 12% said they do not feel mentally well at work. and 5% said they do not feel safe and included in their team. Over 4,000 respondents out of the 26,000 have witnessed negative behaviour or mild harassment targeting people of diverse sexuality and/or gender. Over 1,500 have witnessed much more serious bullying and harassment. These numbers are high, far too high. We want it down to 0. So these stats alone build the business case. This is a business case. Which leader would not want all of their employees to feel safe and secure at work so they can focus on their work? We can also see that, I've mentioned earlier, it's not just the LGBTQ employees that benefit from the inclusion programs. There are benefits across the board. And the work you do in one space for a diverse group or a minority group, such as LGBTQ+, transfers across also to gender, to accessibility, to multicultural and Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander. So the work you do in one pillar for inclusion, a lot of it does transfer across. And also there's intersectionality. There's a lot of people who are not just one thing. I'm bisexual, I'm a woman. I've got friends who are Aboriginal and gay. I've got friends who have accessibility issues and who are of multicultural backgrounds or faith. So a lot of these are intersectional, and the work you do in one area transfers to another area. We're quite lucky with the LGBTQ+ space because we all tend to be very passionate and we love rainbows, and and everyone, we find it's not difficult to get people to join in and be an ally and come along and help you. Another reason for the business case is, of course, diversity brings diverse teams, brings diversity of thought. And a much better, when you have diverse groups of people working on a complex problem, you're going to get a much higher level of creativity and a much broader thought process. But there's one other key element which is becoming more and more prevalent is that customers and clients are now looking at their supply chains and building corporate social responsibility into procurement policies. They want to buy from people, from suppliers, whether it's a product or a service. They want to look to see, do their values echo their values? And more procurement policies have this inbuilt. So you have to address, or if you're applying for a tender or putting forward a proposal, the question does come up: what are you doing for CSR? What are you doing for the environment? What are you doing in the LGBTQ+ space? So this is a very tangible point and factor to build your business case. So if your organization is not already doing these things, this is a really tangible thing. Because a lot of the time they say, oh yeah, we know it's the right thing to do. We know it's lovely to have a morning tea with rainbow cakes and things, but what is that good for business? Well, this particular bit is, a very tangible way, because you might lose business because you're not doing all of these things. One last thing before I hand over to some others. On a more personal level, the more inclusive the workplace is, there are going to be more of us who are able to be out, be proud, and be very visible role models, which I think hopefully paves the way for others, especially, the people who are on this call tonight who are maybe moving from university into the workplace. You shouldn't have to consider it an issue whether you're going to be out or not, and you have to hide yourself. So hopefully with all the work that is happening at the moment in the workplace, and there is a lot of momentum, even through the challenges that we've had with COVID. So far, we've seen sort of more engagement with our members and the LGBTQ+ inclusion space. So hopefully in the future, I'll be out of a job.
No, look, thank you for sharing that, Elaine. I think that's it really goes to the heart of what we're discussing tonight, and that's about celebrating the need. You really established a case for diversity and inclusion for our community, and so maybe what I think I might do is I might throw to either Matthew or Mitt, who might have something to say on what you said, because perhaps provide some examples on what has worked well in their own workplaces, because you both of you come from two workplaces that do particularly well, and it'd be really important to hear what you have done in your workplaces to make sure that the inclusion of our community is something that we is exemplified. It's something that we exemplify.
Yeah, look, Matthew, if you're okay, I'll go first. Yeah, so look, I think just quickly about inclusion and diversity. So I look at it sort of, first of all, for me, it's two different things. So, but they're so interlinked. So diversity for me is sort of an acknowledgement that there is a diversity, there's a diverse pool of people. Inclusion for me is the acceptance of that acknowledgement and embracing diversity. And that's how I look at inclusion. So I think one of the things that, I sort of very jokingly say this, that, in Accenture, I feel very institutionalized in the best way, because I feel like the support system that we have in the organization, and that's been sort of going on for the last 10 years. So we've had our Pride Network running for the last 10 years. And one of the things that we've really focused on doing is ensuring that the allies understand what it is to be a good ally. And that's where the difference between the inclusion and the diversity, they understand, oh yes, there's diversity. There's, we understand that there are all these pillars, and slowly they're sort of getting to know the concept of intersectionality, but they just don't know, how can they help? So one of the things that we've really done is try and focus on educating and training the allies on trying to be really good allies. The reason that's very important is because when we have new people joining our organization, we want some of our senior people to be absolutely equipped and trained and ready to be able to embrace these people and to be able to know exactly how we can, basically lead a group of people who may not necessarily be comfortable coming out. I sort of, and Elaine, you brought up some really good stats, but I had actually read some stats recently. It was a global survey that was done, and apparently 67% students or people who join the workforce go back into the closet, which is an alarming number, and it's a very high number. And I think that it's sad that is the case it is. So I think a company like Accenture, what we're trying to do is ensure that when we have open days and we have tech days, because it's sort of a tech and management consulting company, when we go and try and sort of present to universities, or when university students from different universities come over to our premises, we have these booths, and we have a Pride booth, and I've often sort of manned the booth, and one of the things we do is we just tell them how embracing the culture is, and what we have done as an organization to ensure that we include all diversity, and we accept and we embrace all diversity, and then start to sort of get them to feel very comfortable. So when they eventually do join the organization, there is no hesitation. So that's sort of one of the things that we've done.
Matt, do you want to take us on?
Yeah, of course. I guess just before I kick off with some initiatives we've done within JP Morgan, I'd perhaps echo kind of the earlier comments. I think if you're self-censoring, if you're feeling that you can't be yourself in the workplace, it's not only exhausting, but it really does stop you performing to your best. And I feel like at the moment, everyone's kind of looking for authenticity in who they're working with, especially if you move up through an organization, you take a managerial role. Those working for you want to know, who you are, what you're about. And I think if you're holding yourself back, that comes across. So I think, I'm always advocate for being out, if that's, you choose to do that in the workplace, and just be you and own it, and try and kind of drive your career in workplaces that'll accept you. So I think with that kind of the lens that I look through, a couple of things we've done within JP Morgan. So last year we ran a LGBTI reverse mentoring program, and that was a program which paired up our executives with members of our identifying workforce. And what this allowed is our LGBTI staff to play a mentoring role to our senior execs to really explain their lived experiences, talk about perhaps their backstory. So why they're working at JP Morgan, some of the experiences they've had, maybe in prior employers where they haven't been as inclusive, and just really drive home why LGBTI inclusion is important to them, and therefore why it should be important to to the leadership here. I think, especially, I was here during marriage equality. That was a very difficult time for the community. And if you're not part of the community, perhaps seeing sign writing in the sky might not have been seen as triggering as it would actually if you are part of the community. Seeing the adverts on the TV and the language, we just wanted to make sure that people understood just how much that can impact the workforce. At the end of the day, you don't check yourself and your emotions, at the door. You do bring that to work. So we had to make sure that through this mentoring program, there was that understanding. I think the other thing I'll just perhaps highlight quickly is just the visible cues in the offices. So we have clients come in, we have staff from offshore come into our offices, and I just love it when I see them walking around and checking kind of the rainbow stripes that we have on our office panels. We have wireless phone chargers with pride kind of plastered over them. We've got flags, we've got badges, and even Wear It Purple Day and some of the other significant days, we'll have either rainbow balloon arches, and just really kind of make it a big thing of showing that we support the community here. So as an identifying guy, I love walking into my office and seeing that, but I also love seeing the clients take note, seeing perhaps staff, if they work in some of the more conservative countries in APAC, come in and just light up when they see a rainbow sign, etc. So I think these are small things, but they do make a massive difference. Something else we've done recently, so we've got pronouns and all our email signatures on our internal phone directory. And again, it's a really simple thing, but it means a lot to certain people, and it just is a great thing to demonstrate how we're moving forward with an inclusive environment.
That sounds fantastic. And I guess, Riley, you really bring an interesting perspective being from a university partner. What do you think universities, what has RMIT done in terms of trying to do something really tangible in terms of successful initiatives at the university for students?
So I guess a project that I'm really proud of that we've recently, we're continuing to work on, is the support we provide for our trans and gender diverse staff and students. That work has been really rewarding and inspiring, and we've immediately seen the positive outcomes it has. So I guess the reason we started embarking on that work was that we identified that it was sort of a need within the community based on feedback from surveys from previous events that we'd done. And so then we developed a gender affirmation guide for our staff and students, and it's just one guide that embeds both supports for both staff and students. And so something in there that we have for staff, for example, is we have dedicated leave for staff who wanted to affirm their gender. So they might want to take some time off and they can work that out between their manager. But then for students, we've got other sorts of support. So I might get in touch with a student directly, and then if they needed assistance sort of like approaching their teachers or their classmates or whoever, wanting to explain what their pronouns were, or if there was some changes that they wanted to talk about, I can sort of help them through that process. Sometimes we'll set up meetings. So it's like very sort of hands-on, feels like case management work sometimes. And early this year, we launched a dedicated website on the RMIT page as well, specifically for our trans and gender diverse students, because I think more and more we're seeing that they do have very specific needs in terms of within the LGBTQ community. We have like National Coming Out Days, which is like really profound and like awesome for a lot of people that are, lesbian, gay or bisexual, but for the trans community, not a lot of them want to be out. Coming out is a very different meaning. So there's like really different needs for this specific community. And we've also recently launched a program where we provide financial support for our students who do choose to change their name legally as well. And I'm really proud of the work that we've done there. So I guess, it's been really consistent seeing the needs met and students and staff coming forward for these very specific supports. And I think without these provisions in place previously, we hadn't necessarily identified that the need was there. Like the students and staff wouldn't have contacted us about it, but it's really up to us, I guess, to like as the people who are doing the work, to identify what needs to be done and trying to stay sort of ahead of the game, because now that we offer these services and now that we have this support available, we're seeing the people come to us and saying, yes, this is something I'd like support with. So yeah, I guess it's about staying one step ahead and then thinking, what can I do next and how can I do more?
Fantastic. There's some really impressive initiatives coming out of the RMIT, which I think kind of takes, my mind then kind of turns to, like, you know, what, now that you've all implemented some of these initiatives, what are some of the measurable benefits that you've seen come out of these initiatives? Because there's a vast array of them that we've just that we've described. So maybe I'll throw that to the entire group. Like, what do you see in terms of measurable benefits in the workplace now that these initiatives have been implemented?
Oh, look, I think from at least I can talk from my experience in the company, and I'll give you an example about implementing a very similar a Pride network in India. But let me just sort of talk about Australia very quickly. So just the morale of people, and what I usually say that yesterday's challenges are today's victories. So what we called as challenges yesterday are actually now. We've overcome those challenges. We actually can see these results, right? And today's challenges are going to be tomorrow's victories. So, we have come such a long way when we see employees feeling so comfortable being who they are. There are people who very boldly and proudly wear Pride lanyards. They could be from the LGBT community. They could be allies, and it's just creating that sort of safe environment in the organization has just made it so much more easier for people to be who they are, and for them to just never feel marginalized, sort of thing. And I think, and one of the things that we that I personally noticed was when I was sent to India for 2 years to work, and I was told that, hey, they're trying to set up a Pride network in Accenture in India. Would you like to help? And we sort of started from the ground up over there, where, as you can imagine, the culture in India is not very accepting, and we use the learnings from what we've done in the ANZ practice, and I started to sort of work with the leads over there and start to implement the network over there, and very soon we started to see the results, and we started to see how people were getting. Even in India, people were like, "Oh, well, this company cares," and there's just this sense of comfort that sort of started to evolve, which was not there a year before. So I think it's almost sounds like a no-brainer, but when you start to sort of implement these policies and you start to implement these ideas, you'll automatically see that the productivity of people and productivity of resources are just going to go tenfold, and they're actually going to get more and more involved, and the more allies you have, the more people you have, you can actually start to then go on to implementing bigger strategies, and it's just sort of, it becomes a really positive domino effect.
I'd like to jump in and just follow on Riley's train of thought about more and more organizations working and creating gender affirmation policies and support for people who are going to affirm their gender. And it's something that I started at Pride Diversity 2.5 years ago, and it was not really mentioned much. There was not many organizations who were doing this at all. And it's since then, in the past 2.5 years, the number of organizations who now have gender affirmation policies, we get calls every week now saying, can you come and help us? We don't know what it is. We know we need to do it, and how we do it, and how someone's come to us to HR and said they're going to affirm their gender and we don't know what to do. Can you come and take us through it all? Because we have to support the person who's going through the gender affirmation. We have to work with HR, the D&I. We also have to work with their manager and their team to make sure everyone gets everything they need to help the person who's going to affirm their gender have a very smooth pathway. And the great thing is, when we get calls the following week, they've gone into work on Monday as them, their true selves, and we get calls saying it was just fantastic, it was amazing. And this wasn't happening even 5 years ago. This was not really a good, if you were going to affirm your gender, you probably leave the workplace go through your gender affirmation and then have to try and find a job and find employment again. And again, barriers to employment, recruitment, forms, interviews, they're not set up, and they're still not set up in many ways to help someone who's affirmed their gender gain employment. So all of these things that we're seeing in place with gender affirmation policies has made a huge difference, but there's still a lot to do and still a long way to go, because not every organisation has a gender affirmation policy or might implement them so well. But it's a great start, and it's moving quite quickly.
I can see Riley wants to say something.
I was like, I put my hand up. I guess I just wanted to follow up on both of you and what you just said, in that really it is a no-brainer, but also that our work ends up being richer because of the work that we do in this space. You know, at RMIT as well, we run ally training sessions, for example, and then we have an ally network, and there's myself and a few other staff members that work on D&I work full time, but the allies are the ones who really lead the projects that we do, and they're the ones that support the work that we do. And the RMIT is so massive, it's so big, I still don't know how many departments there are, and it's always changing and evolving. So I need the allies in all different parts of the university to let me know what's happening there and what needs to be done in that unit or that space. So yeah, that's like a huge benefit for the whole community. And then also, I guess it just makes sense that if we don't respect the students and their identities, then how do we expect to retain them, and how do we expect that they'll be studying with us for the duration of their programs? And same thing for staff as well. So if they don't feel seen, then how can we expect that they can bring their whole selves to work, which seems really obvious, but yeah, I guess, and it's not necessarily about how many students and how many staff on specific numbers, or like every, it's more about the impact we have on the individuals, and the feedback I've gotten from those individuals has just been so life-changing and so important that's to me, that's kind of really what matters. It's not really about the quantity of people that I'm having an effect on, it's the quality of the work, I guess. Yeah.
But Riley, this one of the things that I have noticed, and personally that I've been very positively touched from an RMIT point of view, is RMIT actually used to have, and I think you guys still do have, a mentorship program, and it's a huge initiative. And there's different sections. Pride is one of them, and then RMIT actually collaborates with various organizations across the country. And I participated for 3 years actually in a row, and I had 3 different mentees. And one of the mentees was a very successful story where I actually got the golden opportunity to mentor this student who was, from a background where being gay was an absolutely, it's a no-no, like was never going to be accepted. And he was very, very worried. He was very concerned. He was, he was on a very, very negative space in his life. And I'm not sort of saying, I changed his world, but in a way, I helped him understand that there's so much, there's a bigger space, and and things do get better. And I know it all sounds cliched, but it really, really helped him understand that life outside, and especially once he finishes his education, because these are all last year, final year students, and when they finish their education and they go into the workplace, life gets significantly better, and they can be absolutely true to who they are. And this person, over a year's time, became so confident and so accepting of who he was, and then eventually things just worked out, and I managed to sort of refer him to a job in Accenture, and he's been working now with the company for the last 3 years, and it's been a very, very pleasant and self-fulfilling experience for me. But I felt like, I think for him, such a long way he's come. So I actually thank RMIT for, and he's just one of those people, one of the very few people who's probably been able to be mentored. And I think RMIT has done an amazing job in collaborating with all these organizations, because these people, if they didn't have that mentorship program, they probably wouldn't have been as confident as they are now.
Fantastic. I might actually ask this question that's just come through the chat, since we're talking about mentoring. This is actually directed to Matthew, because you mentioned reverse mentoring at JP Morgan. we obviously just heard from the benefit of mentoring for someone who has experiences that someone wants to learn from. So how did reverse mentoring work in JP Morgan's case?
So if I just use one example that I'm aware of. So typically, if we have maybe a senior leader and they're very committed to diversity and inclusion, but perhaps don't want to ask just some really maybe what they consider to be obvious questions, or feel a bit awkward with terminology and language that's changing daily, and it just basically put the onus on the senior leader to take the initiative and to learn from the member of the working group that was typically was an identifying LGBTI individual. So with one example, it was typically, I think, 6 sessions, and one session might have been on language. And it was basically an open forum where the leader could ask open questions, and the identifying individual could actually mentor them on how important language is, and really just flip the dynamic. In the bank, typically, you progress and you become more senior, but actually, perhaps you don't speak day to day with people at the kind of on the coalface around diversity, etc. So this was really important, just to connect the two and have open dialogue in a very kind of safe setting, where questions could be asked, and the mentor would always kind of have the right not to answer a question and would kind of set the agenda, but we just allowed that open dialogue.
That's, yeah, and you kind of touched on this idea about on 2 things around not just the challenges of implementing any initiative, but also trying to get leadership involved. So maybe I want to kind of touch on this idea that there are always going to be challenges, because we've got people on this call who are thinking about doing things similar to what's been discussed tonight. What challenges did you come across, and how did you actually get leadership involved? I think from our experience at OFA, that tends to be quite an important one. Inclusion works really well when we have executive sponsors and leaders at that level, supporting that. And we saw that with marriage equality, as we heard earlier from Elaine. So maybe if we kind of it'd be really great to get to a sense of that, because I think there are some people here who would love to know what that looks like in terms of overcoming those challenges, not just from a leadership perspective, but also any other kinds of challenges.
Sure. I think probably the key thing to me is to find a leader that wants to do it and isn't just doing it to be seen to be doing it, and perhaps has a personal connection with the community. So you'll know very quickly when you talk to somebody whether they authentically want to support LGBTI inclusion, or whether disability or any other factor of diversity has been taken, and actually LGBTI is what they've been assigned. And I think when you sit down with a leader and just ask why they actually want to drive inclusion in this space within the organization, you'll get a steer for how committed they are, and especially if they've got as I say, a personal connection with the community, family member, friend, or even I know some of our senior leaders perhaps will have seen colleagues who haven't been out in the workplace if they've been in their careers for a long time, and then seeing the change in them when they've then been able to come out, and just how much more productive, how much happier they appear to be. So I think if you can just find that leader that has a connection to somebody in the community, then that really helps get the buy-in. And I think just we probably touched on it at the start of this session around evidencing and showing how much better it is when employees can be themselves in the workplace. They're not having to self-censor, they can perform well. And I think leadership, if they can see that and acknowledge that, will definitely run with the initiatives. And I think maybe finally, just it's so great as well if you can find other leaders that drive initiatives in this space. Just to give some examples, you look at places like Macquarie, they've got a great approach with diversity, and their CEO heads up some great initiatives there. Obviously, Alan Joyce at Qantas. There's a number of different senior leaders within the business space that really do kind of was it walk the walk and talk the talk. So if you can kind of demonstrate that to the leadership as well, that is definitely something that I would suggest would help.
I'd like to,
Elaine?
yeah, something just to be a little bit wary of as well, which I found out. Sometimes when you're very passionate about something and you have a great idea, which I think every idea I have is great, of course, you can get carried away a little bit. And, one of my previous roles in the corporate world, I thought was a great idea and everyone should get on board. And I sort of tried to steamroll at people because I was just so excited and thought, of course, it's the right thing to do. And what I learned was you do have to take your time sometimes and pick your battles, or pick, and as Matthew said as well, find the right people who are going to support you and speak up for you, and especially at very senior levels. But yeah, so just to, I had to realize not every idea I had everyone was going to love it, and not everyone was going to come along on the journey with me. So I learned to pace myself, and because you can get be seen to be pushing your agenda where you're just trying to do something for everyone. So it was learn to pace yourself, learn to check out the lay of the land first before you go in like a bulldozer like I did, and sort of talk to people, get some people on side, get numbers. Once you've got mass, that helps as well. And also what Matthew said was very relevant, is to get other leaders to talk to your leaders if they're not on board. That is, and they're always willing, all of the senior CEOs who are, very pro LGBTQ inclusion, are very happy to talk to other leaders about it. It's what they like to do.
Any others that like?
I guess, yeah, 100%, you want your leaders to be committed and I was talking to someone else recently, not from RMIT, but sometimes people contact us to have these sorts of conversations, and we talked about embedding that the commitment of leadership into their strategic plan. So from the get-go, if you are starting from the beginning and starting from scratch and trying to get buy-in, then part of the action plan should be that leadership have a role to play. So it's not just on everyone else in the community. And so then the person who's endorsing it, who ideally is the leadership team as well, they know that that's part of their role from the get-go. But then, of course, there's always going to be challenges, and even along the way with little projects that you're doing. And the same at RMIT, we have, like I said, such a massive university. There's lots of people that I'm always talking to try and convince that this is the right thing to do sometimes. And I guess most of the time it seems like it comes from a place of not knowing and not understanding, or a lack of education potentially as well. So whether it's having a conversation and bringing up some data, or speaking to individuals who have been impacted, who are willing to talk, and then trying to build a case that way, like having real life stories that I can tell, like highlighting the pain points of a particular individual who's impacted, and this is how we can make it better. And then often the response I get changes from "this is not a priority," like to "oh, I had no idea, I didn't realize that was what was happening at the university, and what can we do and how can I help?"
Yeah, look, I think just from my point of view, I think a lot of organizations now have a concept of career counselors. Either some of them are embedded in HR, or they're just across the organization. I think a lot of career counselors are now sort of moving on to the position of mentors and career mentors. And I think it's important for people joining the organization to sort of bond with your career counselor, and not just talk about your career, but also start to sort of look at them as your mentor, and someone who can sort of guide you from a sort of almost a personal point of view, who understands your challenges and your issues. And then again, as a lot of people have been saying, it's also important to find, but it's important to understand, once you get an organization, to understand the lay of the land, how things sort of work, but also at the end of the day, also try and understand who really a big sponsor is for the causes that you are looking to sort of, get answered. Often there's, a senior exec who is running a Pride network, or is sponsoring a Pride network, and they are the people you need to sort of go and connect with, and start to sort of make yourself visible, so they know that you're there to help and you're looking to be part of the network and you're looking to sort of add value.
Fantastic. I think like a lot of what's been discussed kind of undercuts this idea of bringing people on board with the cause for inclusion. And I think one of the questions that just popped up, and so for those who are listening, like as attendees, feel free to ask questions either in the Zoom chat box or on Facebook comments. But one of the questions that just came through from Helen was, how do you actually engage allies? You know, like what does that look like? You know, Helen asked about it, what it's like from our RMIT's perspective, but ultimately I think it comes down to this idea that, you know, we need to get people involved, not just our leaders. We need to get other people involved within our community, but also allies who aren't in our community. And there's that really interesting way of engaging different types of allies, because I'm an ally to people within the community. You know, like I'm an ally to Lane in terms of you know, people are allies to me. And so what does that mean? Like, how do we engage people, not just, in terms of being allies within and also outside of our community?
So I guess practically speaking, we have an ally network in the digital space. So we use Yammer as a platform where people can talk and share. And we've got the ally network, and then we've got another space for, which is our DGSS network. And DGSS is our acronym for LGBTQ. So people identifying as part of the community have a separate forum. So there's that online space where people are, you know, free to share a new film they watched on the weekend and to something a little bit more political, or, you know, any sort of tone really goes, as long as it's respectful. And then in terms of engaging the allies, it's really up to the individual in terms of how they want to be involved, but we make sure that we put the invitations out there. So a few projects that, once a year we run our annual Pride Week, which is 1 week full of events for both staff and students. And so I'll put a proposal together and share it through the ally network, whether it's through the email or through the Yammer, and people make recommendations as to what sort of events they wanted to see, and then allies may lead those events as well. So if they wanted to host a trivia, or wanted to run a morning tea, or wanted to do a sports session or something, or they might just want to suggest, this is what I want to see, can you please put this together? So then we might do the back end work and make that happen. Or another example is our ally guide. We asked the community and the DGSS community what they felt like it meant to be an ally, and then we got all the contributions from the ally network and then put it into like this one page PDF document, which we could then share, and we could say this is created by the ally network for the rest of the community. So yeah, we just put out those invitations, I guess, and there's also we have a dedicated page for the ally community on the staff and the student website as well, and people can contact us very freely and openly if they wanted something to happen or felt like something important wasn't being addressed.
I was just going to say it's important to have training and education as well, because a lot of people, and I haven't got the stats in front of me, but I know there's some stats about the numbers were quite high for people who weren't allies. And the reason they weren't allies is they didn't know how to be an ally or what it meant to be an ally. So I think training and education is very important. And luckily, many organizations are doing the LGBTI plus awareness training. So many people come along to it and find out it isn't that difficult. You don't have to, it's not a lot of work. You can do some very simple things, like calling out, because the person who may be the brunt of a joke or some harassment doesn't want to say anything, but if you're there and you hear jokes or you hear innuendo, you can call it out. So there's very, simple things you can do that can make a big difference. And wearing your ally pin, again, just wearing a little rainbow pin. So I think education and training, so people know what it means to be an ally, what you need to do to be an ally, and why you should be an ally.
Yeah, we have we run our ally training sessions in-house. and we've done that for a few years now. And so once they do the training session, then they can join and become an ally. But I think the more we've run those sessions, the more requests there have been for those sessions to happen. So now they ended up, we kind of tailor them for specific groups, depending on if it's for RMIT counselling, or if it's for the medical hub, for example, or if it's for a student audience as well. I've gone in and, you know, done like a 1-hour lecture for students, depending on the program they're teaching. So yeah, the more you do it, I think the more sort of people want it and see it as relevant in whatever they're doing.
And we have a number of newsletters that go out on a weekly basis, monthly basis, some from the CEO, some sort of local, and we always take opportunity to sort of, you know, piggyback on those newsletters and sort of say, hey, we are having ally training, because the Pride Network regularly runs ally trainings. So we sort of publish that and we say, hey, come along to the ally training. And I've often said this jokingly, but it works. You know, alcohol and food draws people. So if you're going to have any, you know, event, throw a bit of a spread, and people will just come and they know, like they know that there's the session. It's not just it's surprise, but they're very, very accepting of it, and they would come and they would, because one of the things that we do is you can become an ally by through our portal, and you can sort of say I'm an ally, but then there is a coveted lanyard that you get, an ally lanyard. You can only get that if you are trained as an ally. And we have an exhaustive ally training program that we've put together over the years. So we organize these events and we sort of get people to come, they have a few, drinks and food, and then we sort of do the ally training, which is sort of a 45-minute training. And at the end, everyone gets this beautiful lanyard. And so that's another way we sort of try to sort of get more people to, and so many people have come to us at the end of the training. They're like, we've always acknowledged and we've always understood that we need to be accepting of all the different diversity pillars. But this is the first time we really, really understood how we can actually play and be good allies. And before that, they had the intent, but they just didn't have the resources. So it's always turned out to be quite a positive experience for them.
Yeah, you're touching on this, the intersectionality point again, Amit, and I think, when I asked this question, I did say, you can also be allies within our community, and does anyone here kind of have any thoughts or ways in which that's worked really well? Because sometimes we need to be allies within our community as well, and has anyone seen anything that's worked really well? Matt?
I think I'm really conscious to make sure that I don't speak on behalf of community members. So it's very easy for me as a CISO guy to stand up and talk about a trans initiative, but I don't want to be speaking about this training or delivering it if there is somebody that can actually do a much better job. And so just being conscious of actually, if you're hosting a panel event, if you're running training, etc., what's the audience going to take from the speaker? And is there somebody that can give a lived experience and talk to it? So we had some trans training recently for our employees, and we had members from our Philippines Pride group deliver that training, and it was absolutely fantastic. And I think that is something that I take away all the time, and I'm always really conscious of, is making sure that the right people within our organization are delivering the message and talking about their experience. And me, I'll absolutely amplify a voice, but not speaking for them. So that's kind of a takeaway that I have personally. I'm always kind of checking myself that I'm not talking on behalf of people that actually, if they can, should be able to present and sell and tell their story.
I think it's about also, we're talking about allies in the workplace, speaking up and speaking out. I think it is also among your friends as well. I don't always get it right, but I am, because of the job I do, I'm a lot more informed than many of my friends. And often they say things which, I don't jump down their throat. I don't want to say, whoa, don't, but I do point them, put them in the right direction, say, don't use that language, or maybe you should think about this and the impact it has. And so make, my friends or colleagues or acquaintances sort of aware that some of the language they use. So even, we're a community of communities, we're not just a community. And so things change daily, language changes daily. And even for those at the front of this, where we should be informed, we don't always get it right. So, but if you do hear something that isn't right about another one of your, another community, you know, make sure you speak out and speak up.
See, the way our organization is structured, and it sort of helps facilitate that communication between the different pillars, as we call it, is so every area within an organization has an IND network, and within the IND network, we've got interlocks, as we call them, or you know, people representing the pride. There's disability. There are 5 pillars that we have, and every month they get together and they talk about you know, the different things going on, and then sort of bring back information. So what we often do is we sort of go and say, hey, this is what we're doing from a Pride Network perspective. Can you go and spread the word? And they do the same thing. So we often have my interlocks sort of coming back to us from, say, the financial services space or the communications, media, and tech perspective, and they're saying, hey, the interlock for disability, they're running a championship drive for, you know, X, Y, and Z, and you know, we should sort of put that in our newsletter, and we should encourage our allies and our you know, community members to go and attend that and become champions for disability, for example, or veterans affairs, or whatever the case may be. And that sort of, you know, that really sort of builds a very healthy intersectional communication and collaboration between the organizations, and it just seems to be working. We've recently started doing that, whereas, you know, initially the focus was obviously very much pride, but we've realized that, you know, it's unity in numbers, and we sort of embraced that, and we started sort of work together with the others sort of, you know, sections of pillars within the organization.
Perhaps just one thing to add to that. So if you are looking to set up a Pride network, and maybe hosting a solely Pride event seems perhaps too much to start with, trying to get somebody from the community on a panel for a diversity group that's already been set up, it can be a starting point. So we had a Working Families Network event recently, and that was talking about kind of managing stress during COVID, and we had Kylie Kwong talked about you know, her restaurant business, etc., but actually brought her wife along and just talked through kind of an LGBT element in that environment. We've also had various other panels. We had a veterans panel, and we had an identifying member who used to work in the military. So just finding ways to put a Pride slant on other diversity events really works well. So if organizations aren't quite there in terms of having a Pride group, there are ways to kind of start the conversation of inclusion in this space.
Did you have anything to add, Riley?
In terms of intersectionality, I mean, when the Pride Week events that I spoke about previously, so we do them each year, and then we'll do a survey. And I think those sort of feedback loops are really important, and they often will sort of highlight what's sort of needed to be done. And like, for example, from the previous Pride Week survey, we had a lot of students from Asian, Vietnamese, and Chinese backgrounds saying that they wanted events specifically tailored to that cultural group. And so then the following year, we hosted an event that wasn't exclusively for them, but was an invitation for them because it was a celebration of the Chinese New Year, but a zine making workshop, and it was run by someone who is Vietnamese and queer. And so it was this really nice, beautiful niche, and we just had this room full of Vietnamese and Chinese students making queer magazines, and I was like, it was just so lovely. But I guess, yeah, and something else to mention is also that, like, once you start venturing out into D&I work, it seems like it becomes an invitation for people to say, you know, what about me, or what about my group? And I also want to be included and acknowledged, and that's just going to sort of become part of the work. So it can seem a little bit disheartening, I guess, because sometimes it feels like, oh, you know, I'm doing so much, but I can't do everything for everyone. But I guess it's part of the work that we do. You know, those people aren't going to voice their feelings to someone who's not doing this work at all. So intersectionality becomes so important, and it kind of, I guess, you just need to be open and receptive to that feedback, and just listen, and really listen to the community as you go.
Thank you, Riley. That's actually really lovely, like a lovely thing to end on that question, because you actually just opened maybe to my mind to this question of resources. Like, well, I'm coming through the chats and the questions from the audience is this idea of what can organisations do when they don't have the resources, like, you know, to do the kind of D&I work that they're all hearing about now, and how can they, and in particular, there were two questions that came from Cameron and Krista, and Cameron asked, what can organisations do when resources are scarce to upskill employees regarding diversity and inclusion training? And then Krista then asked a question about if there are any organisations that you know, we may be aware of that are collaborating in training, because sometimes the work requires a bit more cross collaboration, noting there are those resource issues.
So, I mean, obviously, definitely want the employer or the organization you're working for to invest financially, and invest in many different ways, invest resources. And it's interesting because I guess now with COVID-19, that's impacted a lot of businesses, and whether or not they have the budget for D&I work is really sort of up in the air. For universities, I guess it's a big issue. You know, they're going through a lot of financial constraints, and budgets are kind of being cut in all different places. So we're kind of having to deal with that issue and juggle that issue as well. But looking around to the people that you're working with in terms of resources, there's so many people within our ally network that have such a wealth of knowledge and personal experience that they can contribute to resources that we make in-house, such as the Ally Guide. And then this year we also developed a version of the Ally Guide for trans and gender diverse people specifically. But that's not to put the responsibility on those people, of course, like always making sure that we're not putting the work back on our community, because it's quite exhausting for that community to do that work. But then also, like, the university network, all of the D&I staff get together and we have meetings together as well. And for Wear It Purple, the different universities in Victoria are hosting sort of a joint Wear It Purple event. So looking sort of laterally at the different resources that are available, and not being afraid to just tap someone on the shoulder or add them on LinkedIn and ask a few questions, because yeah, I guess we get a lot of people approaching us for advice, but I don't think that that's, you know, I always see it as a welcome invitation to talk about the work and share, and, you know, see what resources we can share between us, because it doesn't belong to me specifically. You know, even the work that we do at RMIT, it's welcome for everyone to sort of take on and learn from. It's not something that I want to keep private at all. So yeah, I guess there might be limitations in resources out there, but there's also a lot out there already. So just not being afraid to talk to people and just having a chat.
And at Pride and Diversity, we do have a small employer program as well. So you don't have to be a big organization to be part of Pride and Diversity. And then you get all access to publications, resources, roundtables, networking, training, everything we've basically talked about here tonight. And things. So the small employer program is for most of our small employers, around about maybe 80 to 150 employees. So, you know, there are all small organizations out there that don't have, you know, enormous amounts of funds to spend on these things, but they can find a small amount, and the benefits they get from it are enormous. So we have, you know, a long list of small employers who are part of our program. And following on to what Riley said as well, talking to, you know, being part of the intergroup as well, you may only have 2 or 3. Even when I was at Boston Consulting Group, we had about 180 staff in Australia. There were only 3 of us who were part of the LGBTQ network. So there were 3 of us trying to do all sorts of things before it really got off the ground. And we just went and talked to other networks who were bigger and tried to piggyback off what they were doing and join in with them.
Look, I've always noticed that organizations are always happy to help each other. And if there are organizations that are sort of scarce on resources and funds, they need to sort of go onto their network of clients or partners or vendors and see if any of these companies have, you know, an already existing network, regardless of what stage that network, you know, or where the network is at from an evolution point of view. You know, if they've started, then they can start collaborating with these clients or their vendors. We've had a number of our clients and customers reached out to us and said, hey, we would like to actually use some of your resources and see how you've set things up. And I always say, no need to reinvent the wheel. We've got the stuff, we've got the resources, we're more than happy to share that with you. So, we've started to sort of work with some of our clients now and started to help them get their Pride network up and running.
Yeah, I'd completely agree. And I think, just from my own experience, we worked with a couple of organisations over the years just to discuss how we set up our working group, what days of significance we recognise. And especially, if I think of an example, gender neutral bathrooms, we were looking to roll those out last year. And I think we had 4 or 5 different signs to decide. And we all thought perhaps the challenge would be actually getting those installed in our building, but no, that wasn't the case at all. We had full support to put them in. It was, what sign do we choose when there's so many different options out there? So, we worked with Pride and Diversity, we worked with Interbank, just to really understand what other organisations were thinking in this space. So at least there's hopefully a consistent sign being used in Sydney, albeit I'm sure in Melbourne there probably are variances in the gender neutral bathroom signs, but just kind of reaching out to your peers and speaking to colleagues in this space. I think you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Like, you can just drop a note on LinkedIn or find these various forums to get some guidance.
Right. No, and just going back to a bit of Chris's question, do anyone in the panel are aware of any organisations collaborate in training? Because I think sometimes workplaces are a bit too scared, or they may not have expertise in the inclusion of some communities. Is there any organisations that people are aware of that may help in that work?
This is a welcome invitation for anyone to get in touch with me via LinkedIn if they wanted to, because we initially started with the Pride and Diversity training, and then we've adjusted it to suit, I guess, the context of the university, because we have a slightly different audience. It's not just colleague to colleague, it's colleague to students as well. So we've done a bit of work on that, and then we've developed that one step further and created an online module as well. So yeah, welcome to contact us. It's already something that we share with the other universities in Victoria as well. So like I said before, it's not a little secret with us.
Yeah, and look, I'm not aware of any organizations as such, but again, just similar to Riley, please, welcome to contact me as well. And I'm more than happy to sort of, organizations or people generally to sort of, put this a network.
I think just as a side note, if I see a good podcast, I think one example, I think Jamila Jamil does the I Way, and there was something on, there was a talk on gender. So I just shared it on my internal group chat. There's a lot of TED Talks out there, etc. So there's a lot of material out there that if you come across it and you can share it, actually colleagues love to kind of get that advice and guidance and jump in and listen to that. So there's a lot of kind of unofficial training that can also be really helpful to share.
Yeah, and Cameron just actually suggested the Inner City Legal Centre in Sydney for transgender and gender diverse awareness training as well. So I think the message here is that we're a collaborative bunch, and it's about trying to reach out to each other, which I think is a really interesting point to kind of dive into the last bits of this conversation. Because one of the questions that I was also asked by one of the attendees was from Kim, who asked the question, is there anything that surprised you in the process of building inclusion into your organizations? Is there anything that you wish that you knew, even though we're a collaborative bunch, that you knew at the beginning?
For me, I just think that we clearly underestimated. So, when we realize that a lot of people are, and I mentioned this earlier, a lot of people are very eager to become allies, but I think what we really underestimated is how much they needed training and how much education and how much, awareness that had to be created, because they were just completely naive. They had the right intention and the good heart, but they just weren't aware how to behave in certain scenarios. So I think we definitely sort of, initially underestimated that, and then realized that, that, you know, for an ally to be successful, we need to ensure that they are really equipped with all the resources and all the possible scenarios, or if they are not able to comprehend a situation, then, you know, who to go and ask help, right? And even, you know, for me, I necessarily wouldn't have all the answers, but at least if I know who I should go to or who I should direct someone to, that's important. So really creating those key, you know, anchor points for people to go to and talk to is something that we had to evolve. So we weren't prepared for it. And then, you know, it was a slow journey, but it's eventually sort of become quite a positive experience for us.
I think a very pertinent point is to make sure you share the workload, because it often, you know, there's a couple of people who are passionate and want to get things off the ground and take on quite a lot. And of course, this is all in your magic time. You're trying to do your day job as well. And you can't let it, you know, the network work affect your day job, because not everyone in the organization may support there being an LGBTQ network. So you have to be very careful how you balance the workload and make sure that you start building a sustainable network so that you have, you know, people who can step in and help. And if you know, after a year, 18 months or whatever, you decide to step down, that there is someone else to fill your shoes, because, you know, you don't want to do all that hard work and good work and then have it fall away. And we've seen that happen with networks, that there's very few people doing a lot of the work, not sharing the load, and then you know, it all gets too much. So, you know, having a sustainable network.
Perhaps the only thing I would add, so in terms of what surprised me, perhaps I didn't realize just how much I would enjoy wearing so many different hats in the diversity space. I think you kind of go from 1 minute organizing an event and being an event planner, dealing with vendors that cakes are being delivered or balloon arches, or, you know, the next minute someone's asking you for a confidential conversation, and that can be quite, you know, quite an impactful conversation. And then you're trying to do your day job. So I think Elaine's point is absolutely spot on, like making sure that you've got support around you, and that the work is shared. And, you know, I'm so fortunate, JP, I've got amazing colleagues that I work with in the working group, some of which I think they've dialed in today to the session to support it. I think it's just kind of recognizing that it is a collaborative and team effort to drive forward with inclusion. And I think somebody gave me some advice once around in this space to say, you know, it's okay to step back for a month or two if you just need to take some time out, and then come back to it. It's not going to go anywhere. And I think you need to kind of preserve your own kind of sanity, because especially if you've got a leadership role within the inclusion space, you do become front and center. And if it's marriage equality discussions, if it's trans rights in the US, if it's intersectionality and you know, so many things that are happening at the moment in inequality, you end up trying to be the spokesperson for, and it's draining, you know. So you need to kind of preserve your own health and make sure that there are colleagues that can step up and support you.
Fantastic. And Alvi just in the chat also mentioned -18 as a resource for anyone who is looking for other organisations to help out with the D&I work. So that kind of brings us very much to the end, but I thought what would be fun is if we do a quick whip around on what, like, you know, quick and snappy advice that you think you would give to someone who is thinking of making their workplace. So, you know, think of someone who, thinks that think of somebody who is, you know, maybe you think of yourself actually back in the day, what would you have said to yourself, and how would you go about trying to be kind to yourself in doing this work? Because as we all heard tonight, there is a lot of work here, and it can be tiring sometimes.
Advice I would give my younger self would probably be, well, I guess I was always told that you know, there's specific jobs I should go for or specific shoes I should fill. But I hadn't quite realized that, you know, creating an LGBTQ rock climbing club would ever become a niche and like pretty much a second job that I do after my day job, including the LGBTQ work I do at RMIT. So I guess being a little bit creative in terms of looking at what you really enjoy doing and what you're passionate about and what you're good at, and creating a role for yourself within the context of what you want to do. And if it is within D&I work, you can find a space and you can carve that out. You don't have to fill anyone else's bucket or a space that's existing. You can find your own niche and a gap. And if what you're interested in is accessibility and LGBTQ inclusion, there's definitely a space for that, or whatever it is that you're passionate about. You know, I think you've got to go in that direction, because I mean, as everyone else has said already, it can be really exhausting and tiring. So you have to feel like genuinely invested and yeah, really passionate about it.
For me, I think what I would sort of tell myself, and then, you know, I realized that fairly early in my career anyhow, but is really absolutely very important to be true and transparent and honest to yourself and about yourself to others. And the other thing that I always tell people nowadays is, you know, inclusion and diversity is a full-time responsibility. If you expect people to support the Pride Network, you need to support the other pillars of diversity, and it goes both ways, and you have to acknowledge and accept and respect all of the pillars of diversity, and so that, you know, so yeah, it's a full-time responsibility. That's what I say.
For me, I can hardly remember my younger self. It's a long time ago. And it was a very different world, that I grew up in. I think, you know, I wish the world had been a little bit more different then. And it took me a long time to sort of find my true self and find what I was actually good at. I left school at 16. I have no formal qualifications. And I, you know, came from the northeast of England where, you know, working class background, and I never thought I had any skills to offer anyone or a skill set, let alone get involved in community activism or advocacy. And it was only in sort of my late 30s that I sort of found my place and found myself, and found I did have skills and things I could do. So sort of, you know, the last 20 years has been a very different life, and I just wish it had happened sooner.
Yeah, I think perhaps the only thing I would share, if I could tell myself maybe 10 years ago some advice, it would be perhaps don't try and talk to everything within the LGBTI space. Just talk about your own experience, and then find people that can talk to theirs and go from there. I think if you do take perhaps a leadership role in this space, as I said earlier, there's the expectation perhaps that you talk a lot about different diversity elements and components of the LGBTI spectrum. And I think, you know, you can't know it all, you can't do it all. And I think, you know, own your truth and speak to that, and support and help others to do the same.
Fantastic. We've got quite a few people saying thank you in the chat. So on that note, I just wanted to say thanks on behalf of Out for Australia and the people who joined us here tonight to hear some really insightful comments and some stories and perspectives on how to make diversity and inclusion real in the workplace. What I really took away from this is that you have to be passionate, and you can work with others. That's something that I really took away from tonight. And I just want to remind everybody on the topic of working with others is that we do have that mentoring program. Our mentoring program Out for Australia is very much what we do. And as we heard tonight, mentoring is a really key way to include people in our community. So if you're looking for a mentor, search OFA on Google, and it'll be the first result that comes up. You can then choose a mentor based on your goals and your interests. It could be D&I, it could be anything really. It's a bit like Tinder, and you can reach out and facilitate that selection. If you need any help, reach out to us, because sometimes the platform may be a bit daunting or may be inaccessible. So please do so if that's the case. And the last thing is for all those who have joined us tonight, it'd be great if you could stay online at the end to take a moment to fill in a quick survey. We would really appreciate your feedback. Out for Australia has pivoted to online events like most of the world the last few months, and it's always great to get that feedback. So thank you so much to everybody for sharing your insights. And I hope to see you all at our next event.
Thank you. Bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.